And bonjour. Welcome to today's webinar, Volunteers and Social Isolation During COVID-19. Let me begin by acknowledging that the land on which I live, work, and volunteer is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin people have lived on this land since time immemorial. It is with a mixture of anguish and hope that I express my gratitude to have the opportunity to be present on this territory. And at Volunteer Canada, we are committed to understanding how we can contribute to both truth and reconciliation by addressing our past with an open heart and an open mind to build a better future together. So please introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know what's on your mind at any time. This is a conversation that we want to have this session serve as a springboard for all the ideas, insights, questions, and explorations that we will do together about this really important topic. Many of you may know that it is National Mental Health Week, and that is perfectly suitable for this topic. And for many of us, every week during this past year has been Mental Health Week, and we'll get more into that. So a few administrative things for everybody who is signing in. Today's webinar is being recorded, and everyone will receive an email after the webinar with a link to the recording. That will include the visual of our PowerPoint presentations. It will also be posted on Volunteer Canada's website, so you're welcome to share it with your colleagues and your networks. We welcome questions and have left time for Q&A after the presentations to keep the flow of the webinar going. If you have a question as we go along, please type your question into the Q&A box or the chat box at the bottom of your screen or wherever it appears on the device that you're using. We know that they're all different. So again, we're going to get started with a wonderful panel who will share their expertise and insights and entertain all the ideas, thoughts, and insights that you have to share with one another on this topic. So first we have Margaret Eaton. Since January 2020, Margaret has served as National CEO of the Canadian Mental Health Association at 102 years old. Not Margaret, but the association. CMHA is the most extensive and established community mental health organization in the country. She comes to CMHA from her 7-year role as Executive Director for the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council, TRIAC, a multi-stakeholder council that brings leaders together to create and champion solutions to better integrate immigrants into the GTA labor market. Previously, she served as president of ABC Life Literacy and executive director of the Association of Canadian Publishers, as well as general manager of Magazines Canada. Margaret has many, many years experience in community and will share her insights with us. We also have on our panel Dianne Boston-Nyp, who has been the Community Engagement Director for the Volunteer Action Centre of Waterloo Region, one of over 200 local volunteer centres in Canada. She served in this role since 2007. The Volunteer Action Centre of Waterloo Region is a nonprofit organization that helps individuals and groups get engaged for both personal and community benefit, connecting organizations, programs, and professional development to members while supporting the general community, including newcomers, corporations, youth from sectors of all kinds in the community through volunteering. As volunteering is such a dynamic part of the community development process. And we also have Paige Bromby. Paige is a Guelph-based artist and a community activator. In her role at 10C Shared Space as the member and projects activator, she leads the Connecting Circles program aimed at providing safe, free opportunities for older adults and seniors in Guelph and Wellington County to virtually connect with people and organizations in their community. This role combines her wide range of program development experience with her passion for community-driven change. So you can see we have a diverse and experienced panel to share their insights with you. And we're happy to connect you to their organizations afterwards as well to explore more details about what they do year-round. So we'll start off with a little bit of information about Volunteer Canada. For those who don't know us, we provide national leadership and expertise on volunteering to enhance the participation, quality, and diversity of volunteer experiences, not just to have more people doing things, but to build strong and connected communities. And we do this in collaboration with over 200 local volunteer centers, as well as businesses who are involved in community engagement, educational institutions who provide community service learning, and many other folks that facilitate and support volunteering. So the topic we're exploring has to do with the health benefits of volunteering, because we are all concerned about the health of volunteers. And one of the questions that came to us before the webinar was whether or not we make a distinction between our role and our responsibility for the health and well-being of volunteers. Is that different from our responsibility to colleagues who are paid employees? And the philosophy at Volunteer Canada is that a nonprofit organization that engages paid employees, volunteers, students who are doing co-op placements makes no distinction. We're responsible for the health and well-being of all those that we engage, regardless of their employment status. And so it may look differently because of how often we see people and their roles, but essentially we are responsible, and that is a question that all panelists will entertain in different ways, and we can explore that more. So when we look at the health benefits of volunteering, the first thing that comes to mind is something that was coined, a term that was coined in the 60s, which is the helper's high. And that was a term that looked at the chemical response we get when we feel that magic moment. We are in the right place with the right person who needs our help and whose help and needs help us. And that magic that happens when we are of service to someone else and we feel our purpose in life. And that chemical reaction produces things that give us a sense of well-being. There's also a lot of research that shows that particularly older adults who volunteer have increased cognitive abilities. We also know that volunteering helps prevent social isolation, which is one of the topics and the main topic we're looking at today in terms of well-being, but that also the health that we feel about being connected to others, a sense of belonging, those are natural human needs that we all feel, and volunteering does certainly contribute to that sense of well-being we get in terms of feeling included in social inclusion. We've often seen people who come to communities, whether from other regions of the country or from other places in the world, that social integration can be achieved in part through volunteering. What better way to know a new community, to learn the culture and the structure of the community than through volunteering. And so we know that many newcomers to communities benefit from the social integration aspect of volunteering. And the other thing we've talked a lot about over the years is the benefits of volunteering for youth and the sense of youth empowerment. So many of us feel that we are disheartened or discouraged by what we hear going on in the world and what's going on in our own communities. And we can feel that what we do will make no difference, and it's just so much greater than ourselves. And when we volunteer, we realize that every single act makes a difference and contributes to the well-being of others and to the strength of our community. And more importantly, it gives us an opportunity to shape the communities we live in. And so all ages benefit from the sense of empowerment, but particularly youth at the age where the desire to make a difference and change the world is really being awakened. This is really an important benefit of volunteering. And so when we look at all these health benefits together, so we have social isolation, helplessness, reduced sense of purpose, lowered self-esteem, increased stress and stress-related illnesses. These are the things that happen when volunteering is removed from us. So those people who have been volunteering for years and it particularly had to step away over the last year, what happens when that opportunity is removed. And these are some of the things that we've become concerned about. Those who continue to volunteer and those who volunteer in leadership positions often have a sense of burnout. So whether you stepped away and are missing the health benefits of volunteering, or whether you continue to volunteer in a more intense, higher pressure position, there are health risks. So that's a little bit of an overview and an introduction. And with that, I will turn it over to Margaret.
Great. Thank you so much, Paula and Volunteer Canada. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. And I love seeing all of your names and all of the good work that you're doing across the country. So thank you for joining us today. Well, as Paula's clearly outlined, the pandemic has really changed how we volunteer and how we interact with each other. So I want to take a step back and look at the mental health impacts of COVID-19 on Canadians and how that might be affecting your work. Next slide, please. So if we just think about the Canadian Mental Health Association for a moment, we are in 330 communities across 10 provinces. And this week, we're really proud to be celebrating Mental Health Week and to be having this event during the week. We actually had an Instagram notice from the space station honoring Mental Health Week. So we're really delighted that we've gone to outer space with these good messages. So as you can imagine, the impact of COVID-19 on mental health has not been good. We've been working with UBC and have surveyed Canadians at 3 points over the last year. And the data has slightly worsened since we started doing this in June of 22 to January of 2021. So let's look at the numbers on the next slide. We asked the question, has your mental health gotten better, stayed the same, or gotten worse since COVID-19? And in our most recent survey, we found that in the general population, 41% of people said that their mental health had indeed worsened. And if we look at vulnerable populations, so for example, as we see here, for example, people with a pre-existing mental health condition, those people, 61% of them said that their mental health was worse since the pandemic started. Similarly, we see people with disabilities, young people, parents with children under 18 years of age, members of the LGBTQ community, women, and the unemployed, all really experiencing a decline in their mental health. So if any of your volunteers come from these communities or have had these experiences, they are going to be suffering perhaps even more than others. If we look at women in particular, women were, said 44% had seen this deterioration in their mental health. That compares to men at 32%. And that's partly because men are less likely to talk about the impacts on their emotions, but it's also because women have disproportionately been impacted by the pandemic. So we know that more women have lost jobs. Women also end up taking care of children more often, and we know women have exited the workplace because they've had to take care of children who are out of school during the pandemic. So women are particularly hard hit. If we look at the next slide, suicidality and self-harm are also indicators of how our population is doing. So we know that in any year, about 2.5% of the Canadian population has suicidal thoughts. And if we look at the bottom row here under general population, you'll see that 10% of Canadians have had suicidal thoughts during the pandemic. And then the numbers get much worse for other communities. So if you look at Indigenous people, 20% have had suicidal thoughts. And those with a pre-existing mental health condition, 27%. If we look at the next slide, we asked Canadians what negative emotions were they feeling. 77% of Canadians said that they were feeling these common negative emotions. And very sadly, 50% of Canadians said that they felt no positive emotions at all. In our next slide, we look at why do we feel so awful? Well, it was several of the things that were already mentioned about the benefits, sort of the converse of the benefits of volunteering. Social isolation is contributing a lot to why we're all feeling so awful. There's fear, fear of the unknown, and even fear of returning to normal. Financial concerns are huge, and we found that there were some people who are very concerned about just basic things like putting food on the table. And there's grief, grief from loss, death, ill health, lost opportunity, and lost time. And our concern here is that the impact will not just be on our current situation. So when we're all sort of back to normal, whatever normal might look like, and people have gone back to their normal lives, it doesn't mean that the mental health impacts are over. In fact, we expect that it could be up to 2 to 3 years after this return to normal that people will still be feeling the experience of perhaps even a delayed response, a PTSD response to what has been a trauma on many of us. So we don't expect we'll all just be able to snap right back to it. It may take some time before we recover. Next slide. So what can you do to take care of yourself and your volunteers? Next slide, please. There's sort of 3 main areas that we look at. First is the importance of connection. And we all know that as social creatures, our social connections, our work connections, the people that we meet on the street, people that we bump into while shopping, all of these connections are really important to us. But under lockdown, it becomes much harder to actually have connections with people. So when you think about those connections to your volunteers, we really recommend reaching out in whatever way you can to just cement that relationship, have that connection, whether it be through email or a phone call or a Zoom call. Keep connecting because that will be so important to everyone's mental health. Work-life balance is so important. More than ever before, we play many different roles in our lives. We're workers, but we're also friends. We're caregivers. We're volunteers. We're parents. We're spouses. So achieving a balance among all of these competing priorities can be difficult. And I found, especially during the COVID period, I feel like my life has gotten narrower because it has been such a challenge to actually get all these things done and to balance all of these things. So just being aware that your volunteers are experiencing these same challenges as well as they try to balance all the demands on their lives. And then finally, it's important to have healthy coping strategies. And certainly volunteering, I think, is one of those coping strategies and a good one. Healthy coping strategies are things like getting exercise, connecting with others, getting outside, taking breaks, maybe trying to bring play into your life through creative arts and activities. Talk therapy might be a part of your healthy coping strategy. So by including these healthier responses into your regular activities, you can not only build resilience, but you may be able to help alleviate stress in many different situations. Next slide over. Well, you or your volunteers may find that they need more support, that their resilience is being tested through the pandemic. And if you do find that that's the case, and this could be, signs that you're not able to do your regular tasks. Things are becoming harder for you that were once easier. You've lost energy or you've lost a sense of direction. You may want to reach out. So we suggest you could visit your local cmha.ca to find resources in your community. And we also have a national program that is for help if you're feeling anxious or depressed. It's called Bounce Back. And it is a free cognitive behavioral therapy program that will help you build the skills to improve your mental health. And I guess lastly, I just, maybe it's a hopeful thing. I found it very difficult to have time to volunteer over the last year. I felt in some ways overwhelmed by the responsibilities of being all of those roles that we have to play, the worker, the parent, the friend, the family member. And what I did find was a couple of weeks ago, I started to think about volunteering again. And I got in touch with the board of a theater company that I used to sit on to say, how can I help? Is there a way that I could support you? And I felt that I was at a point where I wasn't so overwhelmed with my own burdens that I could actually reach out to others. And it really does feel so good to be able to do that and to say, I would like to contribute in this way as a volunteer. So I think if you're concerned about volunteers who have gone away from you through this period, I think like everyone, we've been in recovery, and that volunteers will come back when they feel that they are mentally able and mentally well to join you in your very important work. And because of all of those benefits that we get from volunteering, which actually help our resilience and support our good mental health. So thanks very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And I see from the comments in the chat that what you shared certainly does resonate with folks, and people are very appreciative of the resources you shared as well. So thank you for that. And keep your comments coming and keep your questions coming. So next we have Dianne, who's going to share her insights. And Dianne, just...
And I should unmute myself. Sorry. Thank you for this opportunity. It's really great to be on this panel and learning with everyone from each other, which is so much of what we've been doing recently. And Zoom fatigue might be real, but the learning is also real. So let's try to keep that in perspective. The small actions and big difference that we talk about is a lot like that formal versus informal. We've really been advocating for people to do small things right now too. So that's kind of the platform we've been working on recently. Next slide. It's simply about our organization being one of a couple hundred in the country and about 25 in the province. And that network has really been strengthened through this time where we're sharing our learning together. So thank you to Volunteer Canada for being a really great leader in this respect. The next slide is about our organization. Has been around since 1984 and started by a few small organizations, as I'm sure many volunteer centers can attest to. They started to realize that we were all doing similar things with our communities. So we've stood the test of time. We're funded by local municipalities consistently and United Way for such a long time. So although small, we're mighty. There's 3 full-time staff equivalents here and then a number of volunteers, of course. We fluctuate on the numbers of actual paid memberships, but there's always a couple hundred contacts through the cross-sectoral relationships, the school boards, the post-secondary institutions, the corporate sector, and we do provide that central hub for these types of places to all come and learn more about how they can help our community. So we work with volunteer managers and organizations and certainly engage with many other networks, which I'll speak about later. Next slide. So this is just a quick snapshot. I don't know who's all on here. I see a lot of names flicking by. Hello, Saskatchewan and British Columbia. This is great. And I think that consistently, we've talked about this, Paula mentioned it at the beginning, improving our health is pretty big. So next slide will simply give us that chart that we like, and thank you someone for creating it. I think it may have been out of the Statistics Canada from 2018.
Yep.
So it's, thanks Paula, she's got my back. You know, people want to do this for their own motivations, and recent reports of course show very different in the age groups, which I'll show in the future slide as well. I think that we all know we have to have a motivation to volunteer, whether it's boredom or whether we're wanting to improve a community. The whole range is all correct. So even if you're a student in high school, the fact that you have to volunteer, unfortunately, is part of their launch into the community, but we try to take advantage of that as well. Next slide. So this is not British Columbia. This is before COVID. So I just made a slight pun. I hope you don't mind, but it shows and reiterates that the older the person, the more hours a person will give. Makes sense. You're retired, you can volunteer more. The life cycle allows you to do that. So, and that the higher areas, look at the hospitals where the hardest hit in terms of shutting right down. So this shows where the highest number of people are volunteering and the number of hours. We have numbers on that. So let's skip ahead to how we're going to work with all these people. Quickly, again, this slide showing the number of volunteers. The higher number of volunteers hours are from older people, the matures and the boomers. So these were the ones that were hardest hit when they were told not to volunteer anymore because of the pandemic. So we lost programming for seniors that was often being done with seniors. We lost connections. This is not new information. I don't think I can tell you more on that. So let's skip ahead to how we are going to address it, and the technology and the stress. And volunteer managers have been dealing with it so well. I mean, it's not new to us to work on innovation, to work on responding to the community and the environment, to trying new things. So luckily, we're pretty good at, twisting our hat around a problem and coming up with some kind of result. So it is time that we're doing that rather rapid fire, and sometimes it's a little, depending on your organization, it means you've shut down, or other organizations who are continuing and creating new types of programming. Next slide. So here are some, I just thought a picture of a few of the organizations might help identify the logos of hardworking organizations, more formal organizations that have been so amazing at responding to the needs. Mostly the seniors programs, community support connections. I think Jody's here on the call from Kitchener. Thank you for coming. They've done so much work to continue programming. They've actually adapted their online trainings and orientations and intakes so quickly to take in new volunteers to replace the ones that were not allowed to volunteer. And in fact, during this, they've also found that they've reduced a wait list quite substantially by changing the programming for friendly visiting to be more responsive during this time. So we've created new relationships. The library's done a similar thing. They started with 300 volunteers, but they still have 100. So they are doing things. There's people that are out there doing what they can, but because of technology, sometimes we have those isolated volunteers. I've asked all of these organizations, how are you dealing with your volunteers? National Volunteer Week was a real big hit this year, 20th anniversary, congratulations. Everybody embraced the theme, the power of one, the value of one, the power of many, sorry. And it's true, we've learned from each other's experiences. The cities have been creating programmings to keep people engaged. So when we don't have a volunteer role, next slide will summarize a little bit. It's good to give our volunteers the education about what exists and what's there for them while we wait, because this is temporary and we don't want to lose them completely. The funding is important, and grassroots organizations are really in touch with the front line of isolated newcomers or people of marginalized communities, and so we've been working together with them. And the next slide will show you what, as a volunteer center, I've been involved with prior to COVID, BC. I'd already begun, we have been on the Immigration Partnership working groups, and there's a specific working group about belonging. So we've been on the Belong Steering Committee for a number of years, creating opportunities to connect people in whatever way we can. United Way's been great with corporate engagement, of course, groups, and connecting to what our community needs are. The Volunteer Action Center itself has come up with some response for the pandemic, which I can spend another week on, but we'll just leave that for today. Wellbeing Waterloo Region is another offshoot of our regional government looking to provide supports to the community for their psychosocial health. And I belong on the Psychosocial and Spiritual Support Working Group, which is a really fantastic network of community support organizations, from seniors, counseling organizations, grieving supports, etc. The fun behind the MASK project was very unique. Again, it's an architect student did this as part of her thesis, her community involvement piece, and it's still going. Even though she's finished her dissertation, she's got to finish this project, and we're going to have an actual quilt made up of masks that people have sewn and created designs and messages on, and that will be a post-COVID display that we can do. And then I could go on about National Volunteer Week, but I know a lot of you have done it yourself, so I'll let you save time on my part from there. And I think at the end, we're just looking at what we've done for the pandemic. Our center was very much involved with the establishment of the pandemic plan, or the function of the pandemic plan around volunteer engagement. So we created a collaboration with the municipalities to help intake volunteers with us into a new system that would actually put volunteers into a pool where they could volunteer at one of maybe 10 or 12 essential service organizations through the pandemic. So that was a really new integral piece that we hope to maintain some form following the pandemic as well. It's created a new system for intaking volunteers that we're going to continue to explore. I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Dianne. A lot there, and a lot of great references that people can follow up on your website as well. Certainly, many volunteer centers, including your own, are really very actively involved in this area. So thank you, Dianne. So now over to you, Paige.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks, everyone, for joining us and Volunteer Canada for this amazing webinar. As Paula introduced me as, I'm Paige Bromby. I go by she and her, and I work at 10C Shared Space in Guelph, Ontario. I'm going to be touching on how 10C has been engaging our volunteers virtually during the pandemic. But as I'm assuming most of you don't know what 10C Shared Space is, although I did see a few Guelphites in the chat, so that's fantastic. But I'm just going to share a little bit about the organization first. So 10C Shared Space is a hub for community changemakers in Guelph, Ontario. We're a not-for-profit social enterprise, creating a platform for those working across sectors and engaging in collaborative work to improve our community. On the next slide, you'll see our theory of change graphic, and this is basically our guiding principle towards social change in our community, and it guides our programming and all of our collaborations through the entire organization. Our physical location is a downtown co-working and event meeting space. As you'll see in the next few slides, we have co-workers who work on various projects all the way through the week. And if you go to the next slide, we are home to many different organizations, including a queer library / resource center. On the next slide, I think you'll see our art gallery that is run out of our main floor of our space. On the next slide, I believe you'll see our community kitchen, which multiple organizations and 10C staff both make food out of weekly. And you can go to the next slide now, Deb. We also grow we have a rooftop garden in the works, nice patio space. It's really just a wonderful community space right across from City Hall, downtown Guelph. So in the last few years, 10C has really been expanding our programming and fueling the social change sector in Guelph to create a stable platform for collaboration, resource sharing, and collective community impact. We prefer to work with the community rather than for the community, and that really translates into a lot of partnerships and collaborations with a variety of organizations, including urban agricultural organizations, the city, the Guelph Arts Council, and many, many other organizations both within Guelph and outside of Guelph. Volunteers, as you can see in our wonderful pictures here when we were able to see people, are the lifeblood of 10C. At our downtown location, volunteers run our front desk, they answer our phone calls, they help run our events, they make food for local charities in our community kitchen, and they just generally make 10C into a beautiful, lively place to be. They were really invested in our space, and that's why it was so hard when we're faced with the difficulty when the pandemic hit and we're forced to close our physical space. And on the next slide, you'll see we really had to think, how do we engage change makers virtually? We didn't know, and I'm sure most people didn't know. So on the next slide, you'll have to forgive me. We don't have any pictures of this program because it's virtual, and we do not share photos of our participants. So this is our graphic that you'll have to just listen to me chat about. In January 2021, 10C launched a program called Connecting Circles. It's meant to provide older adults and seniors with a way to engage with their community virtually. These gatherings are intergenerational in nature, and it's really just a group of people who want to learn, connect, and build a better community together. It was a major goal of ours when we were developing this program to engage volunteers as much as possible. And when we were developing the program framework, we realized that some of our biggest battles were going to be encouraging meaningful dialogue in our breakout rooms. You know, nobody wants to sit in a breakout room for 15 minutes in complete silence. Trust me, it's awkward. So we also knew that the older adults and seniors that we were marketing this program towards may not feel like they needed help. They may not feel comfortable opening up to strangers over a virtual platform. But the thing is, we learned this. If you go to some of those same people and ask them to help you with this program, if you go to those same people and say, hi, I need help so that we can outreach into our community, you'll be blown away with the difference in response and the difference in engagement in those discussions. And that really gets back to what Paula was touching on about a helper's high, right? People are much more interested in being engaged if they think that they're helping their community than if they think they're helping themselves. And so that's really where we came up with the idea that our volunteers were just going to attend our circles with the sole purpose of being active participants. And our volunteers spend the entire circle engaging with other participants and helping manage our breakout rooms. And to be honest, now it's hard to tell who the participants are and who the volunteers are. That's how much engagement there is between the two groups. We have participants who are sending me resource links after our circles, and we have volunteers who are coming up with the most amazing ideas in our breakout room discussions. So I'm really, really happy that, that there isn't a difference between our volunteers and our participants now. As we moved into the new stage of Connecting Circles, which is a series on social change, we added on a new role for our volunteers. That's minute taking. These aren't your typical meeting minutes. Over the hour-long circle in multiple breakout rooms, our volunteers are scribbling down quotes, statistics, resources, and ideas that are shared. We don't record our circles. That's mainly because we find that it dissuades people from participating. And in a program where our goal is to foster dialogue, it's not even worth it. But we did want something that our volunteers and our participants could have as a takeaway. And that's where these circle summaries came up. So we take all of those meeting notes and compile them into a series of graphics, kind of like a newsletter template. And that gets sent out to all of our participants and our volunteers after the circle. And it's really just a snapshot of the night. It has resources for the participants to follow up on. And it's also turned out to be a fantastic marketing tool to kind of show people what they're missing in these discussions and to kind of provide people who weren't able to attend a little bit more information about how that night went. So our volunteers just do an absolutely amazing job taking these minutes. They write down the most inspirational quotes, and they get the finest detail. It's incredible. And these people range in age from 16 to 85. And when I literally say our 85 or our 80-year-old volunteer is the most Zoom savvy person I have ever met. So it is hard to engage with seniors virtually, but it's definitely not impossible. And yeah, these volunteers, they're engaged and they're connected. They feel empowered by the community that they get to be a part of, and they're encouraged by the discussions that they get to bear witness to. So we look forward to the days when the volunteers can man our front desk again. But in the meantime, we're really grateful that they are able to populate 10C's virtual spaces too.
Thank you, Paige. A lot of comments in the chat about how intrigued people are of the blending between participants and volunteers, and some people thinking they might try it. So you've already inspired folks. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. We're very committed at Volunteer Canada to finding answers to additional questions. We will review the chat and the Q&As to see if there are any questions that we could answer or send resources to you as a follow-up. We also know that our panelists have welcomed you to contact them and their organizations to find some of the resources and the references that they have made. At Volunteer Canada, we do have a special COVID-19 resource page, which will have this webinar as well as many others and other resources as well. And to also point out that we had the launching or the release of a new article on volunteering, volunteer counts, formal and informal volunteering contributions. And this was a really great way to recognize all the great things that people do in organizations, but also all the great things people do to help one another outside of organizations. And so we will be mid-June hosting another webinar on this topic. So that's in terms of follow-up. I really want to thank our panelists. This was wonderful in terms of the ideas, the thoughts, and the responses you've had for those who participated. So thank you, Paige, Dianne, and Margaret. It was just really a great conversation. And thank you all for the ideas you shared with one another and for your questions. And again, like all good conversations, let's keep this one going because we know we have another number of months to keep us all together inside and out. So thank you. And we will see you again soon at our next gathering.